We are joined by Rams GM Les Snead. Les, it's great to have you back. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good, Les. Appreciate the visit. Thank you very much. I know you were at Sean McVay's wedding over the weekend, and you agreed to Aaron Donald's new deal on Monday. Seems like a pretty solid few days. How do things feel generally right now? Like, what's your energy feeling like?
The energy's good in that we're you take, hey, Sean getting married, finally for him and Veronica have been together since he's been here. So I've mentioned many times when you go career records, she does a lot of credit in the wins that he's garnered as a head coach, right? To probably help probably give a new contract to AD and be a wedding gift for Sean, that's great. But we're at that point where this was the last day of our OTAs, our mini camp, and we're about to close shop and go on one last, let's call it getaway, and come back and like you said, get ready for that heavyweight fight on Thursday night versus the Buffalo Bills.
We're talking to Les Snead. So, Les, what about AD? Like, he had raised the idea in the past that maybe he might retire after 8 seasons. At any point, were you concerned that Donald would not be back and that he might actually retire?
I think, Jim, the one time I was probably the most concerned was probably the week of the Super Bowl, a little bit the week after. But I do know that there were some rumblings that, this could be it, that he had accomplished a lot. And if we actually were able to capture the flag, it might be a career well done. But I think, like a lot of people, it was hard for my human brain to actually rationalize, conceptualize that somebody, right, as good as AD, who's still playing really good football, would actually retire. So, but it was interesting to go through it, and glad we were able to come up with a win-win, because I do think there's AD has a lot more football left in his body.
We're talking to Les Snead. I'm glad you brought up your quote, human brain. I'm going to double back to that in a minute. So, Les, obviously your job is never done. You got the flag, but your job is never done because Cooper Kupp is next on the list. How are you going to approach it with him?
It's very similar to Aaron both players were still under contract. We both felt like that they had earned raises, and then the if you want to call it the complex part of that, maybe the creative part is having our director of football admin Tony Pastors really get in the lab with their representatives and come up with a win-win, right? So that the player is rewarded, and also from the team's perspective that, hey, we can still be competitive in the short and long term, and that's the art of it. And what makes it different this time of year is there's no deadline. It's not unrestricted free agency, right, where a bell rings and a young man has 1 or 2 offers and things happen really fast. So it can be a little bit long. It's a more oven-baked process than microwavable process.
We're talking to Les Snead. So, Les, earlier in the offseason, you were saying that the team would definitely want Odell Beckham Jr. back. I know he did crash Sean's wedding. Sean was hyped on that. So can you share where do things stand with Odell right now, and can you see a scenario where he would be back with the Rams?
We've Odell, making the time to pop in and if you call it crash Sean's wedding, visit with some of his teammates, coaches, even former coaches, like Kevin O'Connell, who is our offensive coordinator, who's now, the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. So based on all the variables, it does seem like this is a very, very good situation for OBJ in terms of we have chemistry with him. He knows our offense. When he is ready to step on the field and contribute, it'll be a little bit seamless here. But similar to last year, Jim, I think OBJ may be in a situation, and I say similar to last year, when he was cut and he was a free agent, he had a lot of suitors, like suitors that were probably in the mix to make a run. And, he had a lot of good opportunities on the table. We're fortunate he chose us.
We are talking to Rams GM Les Snead. Last number of teams have made some really big moves, taken really big swings this offseason. There were a lot of big names on the move, way more than in the past. Do you feel like maybe other teams are starting to adopt your methods?
I think we've always been a little bit of I don't want to call it a copycat league, but because there's only 32 NFL franchises, there's really only 32 probably specific case studies that we can all right, look back and try to analyze and see if we can, take some of that DNA. I know for many years, a lot of us have tried to look at what New England was doing and are they doing anything that we could do? Obviously, you can't totally bring the New England DNA to your build. And so I think we were a part of that, but I also think there's other teams besides us, right, that have kind of realized they were in a window to have a chance to contend, to be one of the better 8 to 4, hopefully 2, even if you're fortunate enough, number 1 team of 32. And I think those over the last, I call it 5 to 7 years, we've seen teams becoming a little more aggressive in their approach when they do feel like they have an opportunity or a window to take advantage of.
We're talking to Rams GM Les Snead. So it's interesting about the window, Les, because now that you've won a Super Bowl, does it change anything with regards to your approach? For instance, do you feel like you've got this window and you've got to be as aggressive as possible to keep putting yourself in position to capitalize while that window is open? I mean, does it change your approach now that you bank one?
Yeah, it'd be interesting now that we have, or it'd be interesting, right, if you came up, let's call it a couple inches short, and you still know that, okay, there's this window where, and when I say window, right, there's an element where you know that, and we know that we have players at specific positions that are playing really good football, have a lot of NFL experience in their prime, per se, and how do we as an organization, right, collaborate with the players, collaborate everybody to come up with the best possible version of, in this case, right, the 2022 Rams. And so there is a belief there. There's an efficacy because we know, right, we've actually attempted to climb to the top of the mountain, right, capture that flag, I think, as I mentioned before, and we were able to do it. But again, that was 21. It's 22. We believe we have a chance, and now it's up to us at each step of the way, right, to do our best to make the most of those moments.
Hey, Les, first and best use of the word efficacy in a long time on this show. Well played. I want to ask you something. The team had this incredible movie trailer around the draft, and you were played by Josh Holloway from Lost in Yellowstone. He said he did not know that much about you, so he studied you, and he said, quote, he's got a brain like a freaking mathematician. And I was noticing, I kept picking up on this. He would say, well, it's kind of a complex algorithm, really, and he would say that, and I'm like, this bleeper's done calculus, end of quote. I'm curious, what's your reaction when you hear that breakdown of your character, and what did you make of the way he portrayed you?
Yeah, number one is I think my wife was jacked that Josh, played myself, and I think she'd rather him show up, right, home from work tonight than myself. If we went back to all the teachers who probably taught me math, they might dissent with Josh, but because math was never my strong suit. I do think that if he got anything right, we talk a lot in our building, right? That there's algorithm, there's a calculus, there's an art to building a football team. There's an art, there's a calculus, right? To as you evolve different variables from when we show up for training camp. And you play, you do week 1, and then all of a sudden, for our sake, right, week 8, all of a sudden Robert Woods no longer with us. We get to the Super Bowl, and Tyler Higbee's no longer with us, and OBJ goes down in the middle of our second team type. So point being is there's this calculus, there's this art, there's this algorithm where it's always evolving, and our mantra is this: no matter what happens on the during the in that calculus formula, those variables, when there is adversity, is there any way we can be intentional about being stronger on the other end? So that would be the only, I call it, similarities.
So stronger how? Stronger, that's stronger mentally, stronger emotionally, stronger physically, stronger across the board. What's the other end?
I still think a good example would be in this, if I were to articulate it from a football standpoint, when we lost Robert Woods, right, we were a team that was able to get in these hurry-up moments. And interesting, right, Sean could probably call a play that we might not have practiced that week or even that year. Cooper Robert Woods could probably mention it to Matthew Stafford. They could get on the same page and in a quick amount of time execute it. But when we did lose when we did lose Robert Wood, we had to slow things down. But during that, right, Matthew was able to articulate, right, partner with Sean, that there is some positives, right? There is some elements of us being stronger by slowing things down and being able to determine maybe what the defense was trying to do to you, and then go from there and let Matthew use his experience. So I always say that all that emotionally psychology, that's a big part of it. But is there a way to engineer that? Let's just say tactically, on the other end of adversity, we can actually be better, just as good, different, that gives us an edge that we didn't have before.
So then finally, Lesson, just a quick follow to that. Is that resilience, or is that preparation, or are they one and the same?
I think, I think you'd have to be somewhat resilient, not to necessarily ruminate, right, on the adversity, and let that bog down, right, your creative juices to figure out a solution. So we always say this: hey, is there any way, right, to not necessarily survive the adversity, but can we thrive on the other end? And I think that can be. There's probably, like you said, a psychological element to it that you truly have to really believe. You truly have to focus in on, okay, we've been disrupted. We're going to be different. But, wow, could this actually be a blessing in disguise? And if it can be, let's make sure we're intentional about engineering that blessing.
But, wow, I love that conversation so much. He's the GM of the LA Rams. He led them to a Super Bowl in February, and they've got that, quote, heavyweight fight against Buffalo. It is September 8th. Les Snead is the GM. Les, really appreciate you. Really appreciate the relationship. Thank you so much.
Hey, appreciate you having me, Jim. It's always fun.
Good stuff, Les. Really good stuff.